Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Grow Through It podcast. My name is Julia and today we're going to talk about all of the books I read in 2025. So it was a goal of mine to read 15 personal development books and I achieved that. So I'm going to go over each one and talk about kind of the takeaways and whether or not I recommend them. So the first one I read was The Body Keeps the Score, and this one was really interesting. I actually really recommend anyone to read this book because it really gives some different insights into how trauma affects us. It was very eye-opening. I also got a different view on medication and diagnoses that I found really interesting. Personally, I'm not one who takes medication very easily. I will if I have to, but it's definitely not my first choice. I think there's a lot of other better options, and I feel like I had pretty strong opinions about this before I read this book, but after reading this book, it did open my eyes a little bit. I'm still hesitant to take medication, but I'm more open to it now, and I understand it more now. It also talked about treating behavior and not putting a label on everything, and I think that was really beneficial to read. I think a lot of people could benefit from hearing that because I think a lot of people, including myself, are very fast to put a label on things and kind of self-diagnose or instantly think, oh, this person probably has this. And it's not in a negative way at all, but I think a lot of people are quick to do that when we should actually be looking at the behavior, because it talked a lot about how it's not always the case and doctors and therapists diagnose really easily, but there isn't always something to diagnose, and just looking at the behavior and separating the diagnoses and the behavior. The book also talked about ways to cope with trauma and mental illness and trauma. So very cool book. I highly recommend reading it. Some of it is a little hard because it's a little bit sciencey and sometimes that can be hard to read for me, but overall it was a great book. The next book I read was Happy Sexy Millionaire by Stephen Bartlett, and this book was so interesting. I didn't know what to expect at first because I thought it was about making money, but it's not. The title is a little deceiving, but it was one of my favorite books I've ever read. Definitely recommend this one. It talked about how social media and society alter our views on success, happiness, and love, how we chase happiness as if it's something you can achieve, like a video game, but it never actually ends. Like there's no end goal to happiness. It is continuous. So I found that really interesting. And it's a really good perspective because it's true. Like you're never just going to achieve happiness and that's it. It's always going to be new things that you're going to achieve. It's never ending. It also talked about the importance of gratitude. So I'll just read a couple of the things I highlighted about this. It said, the Journal of Positive Psychology showed that keeping a gratitude journal decreased materialism and the desire to have more stuff, and also resulted in a 60% increase in charitable donations. It also says, other studies on the topic of gratitude have shown how gratitude journals lead to healthier eating behaviors and fewer negative emotions. So I thought the eating behaviors part was really interesting. He talked about the importance of personal development and focusing on you, how success compounds over time, regrets you'll have, viewing life as a sand timer, and I really liked that analogy. And I just highlighted so much in this book. It was definitely one of my favorites. And I just want to read another thing I highlighted. So it says, the chaos you find yourself in is nearly always less fatal than it seems in the moment. The only things you can control are your behavior, emotions, and actions. From the moment chaos arrives to the moment it subsides. What has happened has already happened. It's no longer within your control, so do not seek to control it. All you have now are your choices about how to respond and your mindset. Another one I highlighted says, reminding yourself that you have survived every moment of chaos that life has thrown at you so far, and you're still here now, is a great indicator that you have what it takes to survive this too. So, great book. Definitely recommend that one. The third book I read was 8 Rules of Love by Shetty. I had been wanting to read this one for a while. It was a decent book. Some stuff was very valuable. I love Shetty. I listen to his podcast all the time. I think it would be more beneficial if you were single and reading it. I found that because I'm in a relationship, a lot of it didn't really apply to me, but it did talk about being in a relationship as well. I really loved the part on healthy communication and how each person has a different communication style. It taught me a lot about that, actually. And I feel like I adjusted how I communicate with Paul because of his communication style. So that was really valuable. I think this book would also be valuable to you if you just went through a breakup as well. It talked a lot about that. The first section on self-love was really great. I love the quote, "People determine how to treat us in large part by observing how we treat ourselves. The way you speak about yourself affects how people will speak with you. The way you allow yourself to be spoken to reinforced what people think you deserve." So that was a really eye-opening quote, and I feel like it made me want to treat myself better because it's true how we observe people and seeing how they treat themselves, that can affect how we treat them as well. It also talks about being yourself, which I think is really important. Talks about your purpose and your partner's purpose. It definitely has a lot of value, but I found myself not super excited to read it all the time. Again, if I was single or going through a breakup, I think I'd find more value in it. But I think it's still beneficial to read if you are in a relationship. I could have also just been in a weird place at the time and wasn't really in the mood to read it. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes I'll read a book and I'm not super into it, and then I'll read it again at a later time and I love it. So I still recommend reading this book because Shetty's amazing. I really loved this perspective that he talked about. He talked about how children who need love the most will always ask for it in the most unloving ways. Children may scream, cry, throw a tantrum to get attention, and adults can do this too. So it's not accepting abuse or making excuses for it, but it kind of shows you a different perspective to help you understand why they are the way they are. They are just in pain and seeking attention and love in the wrong ways. So that was a cool perspective. And I also really liked this quote, "Our difficult loved ones are in our lives to teach us tolerance," which I think is really true. The next book was The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. I did a whole episode on this actually. I thought it was a really powerful tool. I really liked the let them and let me. I thought it was a really great way to take your power back. I highlighted quite a bit in this book as well. I want to read one part to you. It says, "When you say let them, you're not giving up or walking away. You're releasing that grip you have on how things should go and allowing them to unfold the way they will go. You're freeing yourself. You're making an active, empowered choice to release control you never truly had. You stop giving power to the other people and forces outside of you, and you reclaim it for yourself. When you say, let me, you unleash your strength by focusing on your response." So really it's about releasing control over other people because we can't control what other people do to us. And it's about taking power in our own actions and how we react to situations. So if you want like a bigger deep dive, you can listen to the episode I did on that. I don't want to go too much into it on here just because I already did an episode on it. The next book I read was The Power of TED, The Empowerment Dynamic. I got this from a friend. She let me borrow it. And it helped me see that I can often play the victim subconsciously. And it talked about being a victim, persecutor, or rescuer, and how to change that dynamic to empowerment for healthy relationships. So it was an interesting book and a really quick read. It was pretty short. And it basically just talks about you have the power to choose what kind of person you are and how you respond to things. So that was kind of my takeaway from it. So I would recommend that book. Oh, and I obviously would recommend The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins because it was great. I wouldn't have done a whole episode if I didn't recommend it. The next one was The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. This was a great book. I didn't love it at the start only because I didn't really know what to expect. I had just read The Power of Ted, which is like a storytelling book. It like was a story, and this one was also a story, and I didn't know that when I first started to read it. So I didn't love it at the start because I don't always love to read books like that. But the last like 3/4 of the book, I read it so fast. It's a story about a lawyer who went to find peace and freedom, and he teaches you the lessons he taught by monks. The best part for me was when they talked about time, staying present, and also living each day as if it were your last. And I think that's a really important lesson. So there's really great lessons in here and reminders, so I would also recommend that one. The next one I read was Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. I had been wanting to read this for a while, and I found it in a thrift store for $1, so I was really excited to read it, but I ended up not loving it. However, there were some good nuggets in it. I think it felt more tailored for office settings, which isn't really what I do. So I think if you work in an office space and you have your own team, I think it would be beneficial to you. But for me, it didn't have a lot of things I could take away. But the biggest takeaway is to lead with curiosity, which I think is really interesting and valuable. I do have people I supervise at work, and I think just being curious about why they do certain things or why they're not doing certain things has been helpful. It also talked about how you can't take responsibility for other people's emotions, but if their behavior is inappropriate, we have to set boundaries. We can't control other people's emotions. She talked about creating more connections with people and getting vulnerable with people you lead or work with. And lastly, she talked about being clear is kind, which is something we say at work a lot, and to communicate very clearly with people. So again, if you have your own team and you work in an office space, I think it would be great. Otherwise, there are some good nuggets, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it more than the other books. The next book I read was The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. So this book kind of followed his journey through this camping trip he did. I think it was in Alaska. So it followed that story, but then he also told other stories from his life in between. So it was really interesting. I really liked the section on nutrition. He also talked about how society tells you that you shouldn't be hungry, but it's okay to be hungry. It's normal. And it offered a really interesting perspective on hunting because the way they hunted was very ethical, which I found really interesting. He also talked about how being bored is good for you. And that has been something that I've thought about ever since I read that book, about letting myself be bored. He also talked about thinking about death and how that frees you and helps you live a happier and more fulfilling life. And one perspective I found really fascinating was he said that what we call a marathon today was people getting dinner way back when. So I thought that was really cool. And it really puts things into perspective. He said, we work out in an air-conditioned gym, but humans' whole lives revolved around having to be physically active to survive. So it was survival back then, and now we're just so privileged and aren't uncomfortable ever. There was also a really interesting section on back pain and the effects of exercise and rucking. It really made me want to start rucking, so I asked for that for Christmas. Didn't get it, but that's okay. I got amazing gifts, but I'll probably get one for myself because the benefits are pretty crazy. The next one I read was The Life That's Waiting by Brianna Wiest. She's my favorite author. I love her so much. I highlighted so much in the first section. Her words truly always take my breath away, and I have to take a minute sometimes. Like, I'll read a section and have to like put the book down for a moment just to like think about what she said. One thing that she said that I really liked was, If you're familiar with healing, being healed will feel unfamiliar. So being healed will feel like weird for you and you might panic because it's an unfamiliar feeling. She also said, this is a little morbid, but I thought it was so interesting. She said, there's no destination but death. So kind of similar to Happy Sexy Millionaire when he said that it's like a video game. You think that once you achieve a level, you're going to make it, but that's not the case. The only destination is death. She also said, trust that life loves you enough to break your heart if it means saving your soul. So sometimes when really bad things happen to us, or we might go through a breakup, or a friend moves away, or something happens that you're not happy with, it might break your heart in the moment, but it's actually for your greater good and it's going to benefit you so much in the future. And then this last quote, she said, feeling lost is often a good indicator that you're actually on your own path. If you're too sure of what's next, you're probably following someone else's. So this book, again, I highlighted so much and it was a really fast read. It's like 230 pages, but it's really broken down into sections and it's a really fast read. So definitely recommend this. I recommend any book by her. She's incredible. And I actually just got an email from Indigo today that all Brianna Wiest books are, I think, 25% off or something. So now's your chance to get some Brianna Wiest books. The next book was The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. This book was so good. Again, highly recommend. It really puts things into perspective. She worked with people who were dying and she wrote about the top 5 regrets that they had. And she talked about like specific patients and the lessons she learned from them. And it was just so interesting. I really liked also how she talked about her own life and how she related to her clients. So I don't want to give too much away because I want you to read this book, but it basically talks about how to live your life to the fullest. And it just really puts things into perspective and shows you what's truly important in your life. The next book I read was The Alchemist, and I think this book was hyped up a little too much because it wasn't my favorite book, but it was still good. There was lots of good messages, and sometimes it's nice to read a story rather than information. But again, I don't always love that. But I've heard it so many times that it's like people's favorite book. And yeah, I don't know. I just didn't love it. It was an interesting story. Again, it put things into perspective, but definitely wasn't my favorite book. The next book I read was Dopamine Nation, and I loved this one. I actually want to do a whole episode on dopamine. I wanted to do it after I read this book, but there was other things that came up, so I didn't, but I want to in the future. But it was just so interesting. It talked about addiction and different people's stories. She talked about the pleasure and pain scale, and she really, again, opened my eyes to all the things that create a dopamine increase, like shopping, food. It was actually really interesting about food on TikTok, on social media, things like that, and how like addicted we are to all that stuff because it gives us dopamine. But it's about finding balance in that. Obviously, you don't want to give all of that up, but it's about finding balance. So definitely recommend that one. The next one is my favorite book I have ever read because it completely changed my life. I will be doing an episode on this topic and this book in particular. It is called The Way Out by Alan Gordon, and it's about healing chronic pain. So after my car accident, and I'll get more into this story when I do the episode on it, but after my accident, I had back problems for over a year. And I think I was like 2 chapters in, and my back pain decreased. And since then, I've been back at the gym. I've been lifting weights. I've been running. and I'm doing the things I used to do with minimal to no pain. And it's just truly incredible what this book did for me. So if you suffer from chronic pain, please read this book. It is life-changing. Like I said, it is truly life-changing. I will talk about this book to everybody because I'm obsessed with it. It's basically, it sounds crazy, but it's basically about how powerful your brain is and how your thoughts can affect your pain. And he tells you about all of the people he has helped or he has seen that this has been beneficial for. And the stories are incredible. And take it from me, it's not just the people in this book. I pretty much got rid of my back pain by just reading this book and implementing the things that he said in this book. So again, I will do a whole episode on it. But if you struggle with back pain, any chronic pain, please read this book. The next book I read was Never Finished by David Goggins. I loved his first book, Can't Hurt Me, and I really loved this book as well. I recommend any David Goggins books because his story and his discipline is just crazy. It's a pretty intense book. He's a very intense man, if you know who he is. He's very intense, but his story is just incredible and all the things he has dealt with in his life. I recommend you read the first one, Can't Hurt Me, before this one because it really gets into his story. This one was more about this crazy race he did. Can't remember how long the race was, but he does a bunch of like ultra distance races. And in this story, he got injured and he just talked about how he coped with that injury. And it's just so inspiring. Like, this man is so inspiring. I used to not love him because he was a little too intense for me when I just saw him on social media. I was like, this guy's crazy. But after I read his books, I understand. And yeah, his story is just so inspiring. And then the last book I read was The Pivot Year by Brianna Wiest. So this book is a book you read every day. It's like just a little passage every day. So it's 365 passages. And again, love Brianna Wiest, so definitely recommend this. I really looked forward to reading this every morning and just seeing what she said because, again, she's just so poetic and inspiring, and I love what she writes. So I want to read a couple of the things I highlighted. So number 1, without you being here, nothing, not one single thing would be precisely the same. You are an integral, irreplaceable thing. You came here to do what only you can do. Number 2, what feels on the surface like rejection is often redirection. When you ask for a big life, you cannot keep fighting for a smaller one to stay. And then the last one I want to read is, you become who you really are when you start choosing the things you actually find meaningful and worthwhile. You become who you really are when even the most minor decisions throughout your day reflect your authenticity, when your instinct leads you before your mind interrupts. You become who you really are when you start allowing the brightest parts of you to shine without apology, when you begin to realize there is no substitute for your own love finally flowing through your own life. So I highlighted a decent amount in that book too. It was, just really fun to read every day. So again, highly recommend. Out of all of these books, the top 3 I would recommend would be Happy Sexy Millionaire. Ooh, this is actually really hard because I recommend a lot of them. Happy Sexy Millionaire, The Life That's Waiting, and The Way Out if you have chronic pain. If not, I'm cheating here. If not, then I would recommend The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Those would be my top 3. But again, I would recommend pretty much all of these except for the ones that I had said. So those are all the books I read in 2025. 15 was a little bit too much for me, especially because I had a goal of also reading 5 fiction books. So I read 20 books in total, which was a little too much. So this year I'm just reading 12 and I'm doing One of the books is another book that you just read one page a day. So I'm reading that one. So that will count as one of my 12. So I just need to read like one-ish a month. So I think that will be more manageable because I do want to read more fiction books as well. If you guys enjoyed this, please let me know. I would be happy to do it again for the 2026 books. I actually started making notes on each book. So either when I was reading them and I found like a really good part, or after I read them, I just jotted down little things, and that helped me create this episode, but it also helped me retain more information. So if you find yourself reading books and not remembering what you read, I recommend doing this. Actually, reading them through during this podcast, it reminded me of all the things I learned in these books. So I highly recommend doing that because I think it's really beneficial. So again, if you enjoyed this, let me know and I can do it this year at the end of the year for the 2026 books I read. If you have any other book recommendations, I am happy to hear them. You can DM me on Instagram. I'm always looking for new books. I got a bunch for Christmas and my birthday, and I got an Indigo gift card, so I bought a couple more books. So I have lots to read this year, but I'm always looking for more recommendations. If you want more recommendations, you can listen to last year's episode where I talked about all the books I read in 2024. Weird saying 2024. That feels like so long ago, but it really wasn't. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions or just want to chat, you can DM me on Instagram at growthroughit.pod, or you can use the anonymous link in the show notes to ask any questions or suggest future topic ideas. If you enjoyed this episode or this podcast, I would be so grateful if you would leave a rating or review and follow or subscribe. That really helps me grow. And share it with someone you think would benefit from it. Thank you guys so much for listening, and remember that you are worthy. See you next time.